You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Jamie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. We're the host of the Strictly Stalking podcast.
Strictly Stalking is a true crime podcast that explores stalking stories told by the survivors in their own words.
Join us every Tuesday as we interview survivors, advocates, and experts to give you a deep dive into the workings of a stalking case.
Would you know where to turn if you or someone you know is being stalked? We'll also give you the resources to fight back, know your rights, and get justice.
Find Strictly Stalking wherever you listen to podcasts from Podcast One.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt in a Huggies best-fitting diaper. Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we finish our look at the Jamison family disappearance. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my Vor Trafalaka co-host, Alice.
Just say it again. That sounded so cool. I'm going to count the number of syllables. Say it again. Say it again.
That's how it looks. Vor Trafalaka.
That was that was a quinsyllabic word. That might take the cake.
I'm pretty sure no word in Dutch actually sounds like that.
That's probably right.
that is just way too
awesome.
Too good a pronunciation not to use. So I went with Vor Trafalaka. It means exquisite in Dutch. You are
exquisite is beautiful. Did anyone else think boom shakalaka when you said that?
Exactly. That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Which would have been a great descriptor as well, but I'm glad you went with that one. I still don't know what you said.
Yeah. Vor Trafalaka. I'm sure Stephanie, who sent that to me, she's
doing a face
she sends
palm.
me these words, and then I try and pronounce them, and she's like, that was the worst pronunciation of a Dutch word ever. I think I probably have taken the cake with this one.
You have.
Even better.
Well, I'm proud of you for trying. You know, A for effort for sure. But I'm glad we're back. A for effort indeed. You know, whenever we record on the weekends, I know we've said this before, but like it's so physically wearing to be with your kids all day on the weekend and then record. I always sit down to record and I'm like, what did I do today? Why do I feel so tired?
Well, you know, I gave my all for the Tide yesterday, so I'm pretty beat down. Plus, we had the change in time.
Oh, we did have a change in time.
Yeah.
Bless all of you who may sleep with dogs, cats, children who don't abide by the time change and wake up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. So may the force be with you.
It's so true. Yeah, it's going to take a few days to get used to this, but it's okay. We're going to be good. And we have a really interesting case to talk about today. We're finishing up what we talked about last week. I think you guys are probably as intrigued as we are. And it's funny because we were talking about it last week, and is this going to be one episode or two? And obviously it's two, because we ended up talking a lot about the various mysteries in this case, and we have even more to discuss. And it's only going to get more mysterious, stranger, and really hard to figure out. I mean, this is a head scratcher, and it's one that's obviously tragic, but one that you just find yourself, I know I find myself just thinking about this. I thought about it all day, knowing that we were going to record this. Just what is the answer? What is the conclusion I'm going to reach? And I look forward to hearing what Alice thinks when we get there. Right now, we are in the middle of the timeline. So just to give you sort of a refresher, the Jamison family is a family in Oklahoma. They are looking to move. They're isolated from the community, and they're isolating themselves more and more. And they have some mental illness is a problem. It seems like paranoia is a problem. They've pulled their daughter out of school. They have some money from an accident, which has affected the husband in the family who has a lot of pain that he's dealing with. And they're going to buy this land in the middle of the mountains, and they go up there to see it, and nobody hears from them. And 8 days later, hikers find their truck. Their dog is still inside. The dog's alive. Searchers come, they look for them, they can't find anything. They end up finding $32,000, I believe is the amount, in the truck. And they find a photograph of the daughter of the couple on the cell phone, which is also left in the truck. We talked a lot about that photograph, but we've reached a point where the police, they're really starting to investigate, trying to figure out what happened here, hoping that if they can learn more, they can maybe find this family. And that brings us to October 23rd, 2009. So they've looked around the truck. They've got dogs. They've got a search. Did all the things that you're supposed to do. But this is a really rough area, very mountainous, very rugged, really hard to search. So now they're back at the family's home. And they discover that they have a couple surveillance cameras installed on the property. So they decide, let's take a look at these surveillance cameras and see if there's anything on them that'll give us some idea of what happened. So they watch the video, and they discover these cameras, they face the driveway, and they captured footage of Bobby and Sherry Lynn packing the truck the morning of the 8th. This is the day they disappeared. And the footage appears strange to investigators right away, because the couple appear to be making way more trips than are necessary, with the sheriff conservatively estimating that each one of them took 20 trips back and forth to the truck. And neither Bobby nor Sherry Lynn speak the entire time, and they appear almost in a trance-like state. If you've seen the Disappeared episode, you've seen some of this footage. You can find some of it on YouTube. To my knowledge, the entire video has never been released. But if you watch it, you don't get the full effect, but you see this. I mean, you see them walking back and forth the truck. They're carrying like one thing at a time. It's not clear what they're doing or why they're putting this stuff in the truck. They're not moving that day, for instance. And it's just sort of an unsettling thing. And it unsettled investigators. And so they decided to show this tape to a psychologist. They let the psychologist review the tape. And the psychologist came to the conclusion that the couple was under the influence of some sort of drug, or had something seriously wrong with them mentally. They were going through some sort of mental state that wasn't normal. And the sheriff came to the same conclusion, especially considering that he and his office had been dealing with a huge meth problem in the area. And that's what he saw. He saw people under the influence of drugs. But friends and family were adamant that neither of them had been drug users, and in fact had no connection to drugs. Weeks would pass. No sign of the family would be discovered. Investigators would learn more and more about the Jamison family, but nothing pointed in an obvious direction. And this is a problem with this case, is there are little inklings of what might be going on, but there's no sort of rock solid leads that are being developed that are going to give us some answer. Now, the couple did have documented mental health struggles. We talked about that a lot in the first episode, but the police couldn't really connect that to the case either. It was something they knew about, and it's something they thought maybe had some influence here, but there was no concrete evidence that some sort of mental health issue had occurred on this day. Remember, the day before they'd gone to see the property, they'd talked to someone in the area, they had discussed living in the area, everything seemed fine. the day before they disappeared. And there was no evidence that their interest in the occult, and we talked about that a little bit as well, had anything to do with this. There's no evidence of some cult rituals or cults running around or anything like that. It was just an aspect of this family. And this is the thing. There are all these little aspects of this family, little interesting things going on with them, but it's hard to build any sort of concrete idea of what's going on from that. They had marriage troubles, and that could have served as a potential motive. But once again, other than just being an interesting fact about the family, there was nothing concrete that the police could build on.
And now this video is one of those things where, of course, it's interesting because it's kind of the last known footage of the family before they disappear. But, you don't know what's going through their minds. Maybe they're not talking because they have marital problems. We know that there was this divorce letter that Sherry Lynn had written to Bobby in the car. Maybe they were just angry and not talking to each other. Those of us who may travel with small children, you know that you may go back and forth to your car many, many times to get the Cheerios, to get the wet wipes, to get, at first, the first time I heard 20 times, I was like, I'm pretty sure I make that many trips with every trip that I take, no matter how small. But it's the eerie demeanor, kind of this pall over both of them as they kind of walk as if ships passing in the night, back and forth to their car with the small child, kind of with at least when I do my 20 times to the car, it's like hurried. I forgot something else. What was I thinking? And I run back and there's like a purposeful movement. There's not that sort of, if you watch the video, there's not that sort of urgency. And the other thing, remember here, is that if it were mental health, we talked last time a little bit about where there could be some shared psychosis happening, but we know that while Sherry Lynn has struggled with mental illness in the past, until very recently, Bobby hadn't had any signs of suffering from similar types of mental illness. So if it were shared psychosis, it does seem to be coming on for the first time and in a very strange way, which again is not leading to any answers, except these are all just strange elements to what we see before the Jamisons are not seen again.
And that's what's really frustrating about this case, is you keep thinking this next thing is going to lead you somewhere. I mean, it's not like there's nothing. It's not like we don't know anything about this family. And it's not like the things we know aren't interesting, but they don't seem to connect to anything. They don't line up with anything. It's like dominoes fall, but they don't hit other dominoes.
Yeah.
They just leave you wondering what's going on.
Right. Because when the psychologist and the sheriff look at it and they're like, I don't know, maybe they're on drugs. Maybe. But then it doesn't hit the other domino of like a history of use or like ability. We talk about meth and how they appear in these types of cases, but the average person who doesn't do meth and has never done meth before probably doesn't know where to get meth for the very first time. And so it's not saying that it's impossible that they were on drugs, but that's another kind of effect of the domino not hitting something obvious. If they had a history of drug use or they hung out with people who had a history of drug use, maybe you'll have hit a domino that can then lead to some more answers. But here it's a general, that translate could come from drugs. So let's go to November 16th, 2013. A group of deer hunters out in the Smokestack Hollow area of Panola Mountain came across 3 severely decomposed bodies. They saw 2 adults and a child. And we always talk about how people who've been missing or decomposing bodies are found by hunters. This alone makes me not want to be a hunter. And the reason for this is a very rural area. It's not a lot of people cross this area. And what do hunters do? They typically are going into the brush where there's not paved roads, where there's not, well-traveled areas in order to basically trick the animals, the deer in this case, because the deer think, no humans are here. We're safe here, because deer try to avoid their predators and humans are one of their predators. And that's part of the reason that deer hunters and hunters generally quite literally stumble upon missing people and dead people. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So they call the police, and when investigators arrive, they find 3 skulls, a number of bones and bone fragments, and all that's really left of the victims were shoes and just a few scraps of clothing. And eerily, these bodies were all discovered face down and side by side next to each other. And there was no weapon found at the scene. The location of these bodies was about 3.5 miles from the Jamison truck. 8 months later, forensic testing confirmed what we're probably all thinking, and which turned out to be true, that these remains would be that of Bobby Dale, Sherry Lynn, and Madison Jamison. But due to the severe decomposition, no cause of death could be determined. And it was noted, though, that there was a small hole in the back of Bobby's skull, but because of the state of the bodies, they really couldn't confirm or deny what caused this hole, or if it was a gunshot, a bullet that caused that hole. All they could note was there was a small hole in the back of his skull.
Yeah, which is, I don't know. When I read that, I just thought I'd like to know more about this hole, because I understand you can't always tell. Bullet holes are they tend to be pretty definitive, I was going to say, but maybe the skull was messed up. I don't know. Your skull,
right. They're usually not clean, right? And I'm thinking of animals. I don't know off the top of my head, animals who are able to bore through the skull, which is like the thickest part. I think it's one of your thickest bones for good reason. It's protecting your brain, which is like, center command for your whole body. And so I don't really know of any animal. So maybe those of you who study animals know if there's an animal who has the ability to bore through someone's skull to get at really the brain. Like typically you'd see that sort of animal ravaging with all of the bodies, but that seems to be interesting that it stands out alone here.
And I think the way you described it's important, because every description of this is a small hole. Like it'd be one thing if it was just a hole in the skull, and you could imagine something, smashing the skull basically to get at the brain or whatever. But a small hole makes you think of what you were saying, like boring into it. And I don't know what would do that. And it feels more like a gunshot wound. But once again, pathologists have a lot of experience with gunshots, and they have a lot of experience with the kind of holes gunshots create in the skull when someone's shot. I would think if it were a gunshot, they would be able to say it is a gunshot. But that is, once again, just another part of this case. Like if you didn't have that, it might lead you in a different direction with what happened. But because you have that, then you start to think, okay, 3 people side by side. One of them has a gunshot wound, maybe a hole in the back of the skull, kind of an execution style killing, right? And the fact that there's no gun there, all of a sudden you're thinking, maybe this is some sort of murder. They stumbled upon the wrong person. They stumbled upon somebody's meth lab out here in the middle of the mountains, and they murdered them or something. Your brain just starts racing. But like you said, it's interesting that they don't see that on the other bodies, because you would think if you were going to shoot one person in the head, you would shoot them all in the head. Obviously, the other people could have sustained gunshot wounds, sort of a through and through wound that didn't hit any bones and therefore wouldn't leave any mark, but that seems a little strange too.
And it's particularly strange because it's not like the bodies were found in dissimilar fashion, right? You would expect if someone were shot execution style from the back that they would be face down on the ground. But then you have the child and his wife also face down right next to him side by side. It's not like they were running in opposite directions. It's almost as if you were talking about execution style, what happens in very sad cases that we've seen before. If you're going to shoot a row of people execution style, you have them kneel or stand with their back to you, and you kind of move down the line. So the fact that they're all in a line and in a similar position leads me to believe that they died in a similar fashion. But then you have this difference in hole. So it doesn't seem like the gunshot was necessarily the cause of death for all 3, but they seem to have died from the same thing.
And I'll say this. I question what we're told here, because this is 4 years. 4 years has passed. And you're finding skulls, bone fragments, shredded clothes, and some shoes. How do we know they were face down? Like, how do you know that? Because clearly the bones have been scattered. Things have been messed with. But that's the way it's described, as face down. 3 people side by side face down makes you think what we're talking about, some sort of execution style killing. But I don't know why. I don't know how we know that. Other than that's what's been reported. But I don't know how the people who reported it knew it.
And this makes me think of Myrtrice Richardson, right? Myrtrice Richardson, her body was found in the canyon, like in a very dense brush area with a lot of wildlife. And in that, this episode was several years ago now, but if you remember when she was found, there was a question of whether there was a police conspiracy, that she was murdered by the police and then like somehow, scattered across the canyon so she couldn't be found. But in reality, we had talked about how it's really hard to find all the parts of Myrtrice when they ultimately found her years later, because the animals had gotten to her and scattered all her bones. And I believe her family members had hiked to the location and they were able to find a bone that belonged to Myrtrice that had not been recovered in the recovery of her remains by the professionals. And so if that was Myrtrice's situation, it's almost like that here. There was so much decomposition and so much animal ravaging. It's likely animals who ravaged the remains, that only shoes are left, because shoes, if you look at your shoes, they're going to be a lot harder to eat. Most animals are not going to want to eat a whole hunk of rubber, but clothes, those will decompose over time. But in 4 years' time, it's most likely that animals got to it and shredded it to pieces, shredded it so much that we only have scraps of clothing left. Think of all the other missing person cases where years later we'll find a jean jacket or a white jacket or a sock, like a whole piece of clothing. At least in the description here, we don't have a whole piece of clothing except for shoes, which makes me think that these bones and these remains were quite disturbed in a way that it seems strange that someone could say so definitively that they were in a line face down.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, like I said, I don't buy this description. There are things when you listen to these stories, they're told over and over and over again. We're all using the same sources. It's not like we have any inside information. We're all using public sources here. And I just wonder if this is one of those pieces that became a fact that isn't necessarily a fact. And you see that in cases all the time where, and we'll do this sometimes where we're like, I don't know if I know about that. And I don't, given the totality of the circumstances, I don't know how you can say for certain that these people were face down when they died.
And one other thing to note that we haven't actually talked about, because there's so much interesting things to note here, is that the Jamisons were found 3.5 miles from their truck. So we know where their truck was. Remember, that's where the dog was found. And that was the last time they were seen. Seems like they took a picture of their daughter, went back to the car, left all of their belongings in the car, locked the car, including the $32,000 in cash, and their dog, who assumed they loved and did not intend to leave forever, locked the car door, and then walked seemingly 3.5 miles, which would take hours, more than an hour at least, especially with a small child, a 5-year-old child in tow, who seemed to only have a t-shirt on in October. I don't know if they actually walked that or not, if they ended up in that location, but if they had been dragged there by animals, it's unlikely the animals would have dragged all 3 bodies and you would find all 3 bodies in that location. So it seems like they were either put there or they got themselves there. But I don't think, despite all of talking about animals getting to the remains, I don't think the animals dragged them that distance. They were put at that distance by somebody or by their own feet. And if it were by their own feet, it would have taken quite some time, and they would have had to known, if they were going for a hike, that they would have hiked 3.5 miles out and 3.5 miles back, which is a total of 7 miles back to their car, where their dog is waiting, locked inside the car, where they didn't have any cell phones or money for provisions. Not that there's anything to buy out there, but they were planning to essentially hike 7 miles with a child, which is, some people are able to do that. I am not able to do that with my small children. And
the distance is another thing you see. You see different distances, but you don't see less than about 3 miles. And you see 3 to 3.5 miles, depending on what you read. Either way, that's a really long way. As Alice was saying, remember, we have a child here. And go back to that photograph that we talked about before. You know, people can debate whether or not she's really upset, not upset, but she's a little girl. Seems like that was a couple 100 yards from their car. She seemed, frankly, to me, what I see there is a tired, cranky child. But apparently after that, they then walk at least 3 miles. And by walk, hike, because they're in the mountains. This is not this is, as Alice said, this is the kind of place that hunters go. So this is not like a nice, gentle stroll down an even paved road here. I mean, this is a lot what they're doing. And so I don't I don't think it's likely they did come back to their car, which leads us to something else that people talk about. The family disappeared on the 8th, but Bobby's phone actually appears to have called his voicemail on the 12th, which is 4 days later. This is unusual for a couple reasons. Number one, the phone was not with him. It was actually locked in the truck, and the truck was locked. One thing people have speculated about is that it was actually the dog, that the dog is sort of moving around in the truck and may have stepped on the phone and dialed the voicemail, which can be shortcut. He might have had it as one, like a speed dial type situation. And it feels like it almost has to be that because, as Alice said, number one, that's 4 days later. And number two, you would have to believe that somebody walked back to the truck with the dog in the truck, got into the truck, called voicemail, put the phone back in the truck, left the dog in the truck, and then I guess if you're thinking it's one of these people, one of the three, well, one of the two, because obviously it's not the little girl, then walked back the 3 miles to where the family was found. I guess it's not outside the realm of possibility. They decided to go camping in the mountains. I mean, we don't know for sure what they were doing because, as we said, they were very isolated. But if they were going to do that, why did they leave the dog in the truck? Now, one thing that I've thought about when it comes to this. So we assume, the assumption is just that whatever happened on the 8th. But what if they did go hiking or something or camping? The dog living is often described as miraculous because the truck was found 8 days after they disappeared. I guess it's possible they actually did hike or do something and they had the dog with them and the dog wasn't locked up in the car for 8 days. The dog was only locked up in the car for 4 days. I guess that's a possibility. If that's true, then they did leave their phone in the truck the whole time because investigators looked into the phone. They tracked the phone, and the phone doesn't go anywhere where they were. So this is a little bit of a black box. It's kind of impossible to know. But I think the most likely answer is probably the dog, though that seems awfully convenient.
But also note that all these, you'd have to believe, it seems unlikely the car ever moved because they are in the middle of nowhere. It's not like they can park the car and leave certain belongings behind, like the phone. So if in 4 days' time they left, they hiked, they came back, they'd need provisions, right? They didn't pack their car as if they were moving or if they were going camping. And so it's not like they had all the food they needed and water they needed in the car, which meant that at some point they would have had to drive out because I don't think they were able to hike out. It was too far to hike out in order to get provisions. And then they would have had to leave the phone or turned it off every time they drove away and then come back. Again, possible, but seems like a lot of effort, especially when they're not trying to cover up anything. Like they haven't done anything wrong. The wrong thing that has happened ultimately is their own demise. So it seems unlikely that they're trying to cover up their own demise that they may not have foreseen anyways. So most likely it seems like that car stayed right where it was, meaning I think the Jamisons probably disappeared closer to the 8th than not. But the dog stepping on it does seem like, what are the odds? What about dialing 911? If you hit your phone enough times, there's an automatic, most phones have an automatic call emergency because if you're panicking, you're just slapping at your phone. That's what it's trying to account for. So it seems to me if the dog's panicking and walking all over the phone, it would dial the voicemail and then maybe emergency as well.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
A lot of times when your phone's locked, that's the one thing you can call is 911.
I will note, though, so wait, did the phone have any battery when they found it 8 days later? Because that is strange. I know we don't know that. That's not in the records. But I will say that if the last time they were seen was the 8th, they have a photo from the 8th, so it was being used, and it was not turned off because at least it got a voicemail call on the 12th. I wonder, you would think in 8 days the phone would have died, even if it was not in use. Maybe. Back then, batteries were better. Things have only gone downhill battery-wise.
Well, and I'm sure their phone was a much, like back in the day,
more rudimentary.
Before the iPhone and everything, phones lasted forever.
I mean,
your battery would last for days and days. Like a BlackBerry, I think it was actually a BlackBerry. Now that I think about it, I think their phone was a BlackBerry. I could be making this up, but I think it was a BlackBerry. And BlackBerries, the battery on the BlackBerry lasted for forever. Those were the good old days. And then one other thing, and then we'll keep trying to figure this out, is in addition to having a small 5-year-old child during this 3.5 mountainous hike, remember Bobby had like chronic pain from the accident he had in 2003? It was before Madison was born. So he's had chronic pain for a long time, so much so that he could barely leave the house. And he's also walking. So, as we're thinking about who or what could have caused their demise, if he were the perpetrator in this case, and he's the one, remember, who was found with the hole in his skull, he would have had to hike his whole family very far in a way that he was probably incapable of doing on a regular basis. Is just strange. And look, it's possible with all the weird stuff that went on that we've already talked about, it's possible something really weird happened here. That, as we discussed, sort of, what would had to have happened, and that seems strange. That seems unlikely. It's possible this is a case where it really could just be something completely irrational, completely that you would never expect, that we would normally rule out, because there was so much unusual behavior by the family sort of running up to this, and maybe we're being too rational here. And one thing that people say when they're analyzing this in a rational way is that the dog being locked in the truck is a sign of a third-party involvement. According to the family, this was Madison's dog. She loved that dog. She wanted that dog with her all the time. And she never would have let them leave that dog in the truck. If they had done that, she would have pitched a fit, and they never would have made it 3 miles because she would have been, flopping around on the ground because of the dog. And the fact that the dog was left in the truck makes a lot of people in the family believe that this is some sort of foul play, that someone forced this family to go on this hike because they would never leave the dog in the truck. I don't know. The fact that the dog's in the truck, the phone's in the truck, the money is in the truck, makes you feel like when they walked away from the truck that day, either they were forced to do it or they didn't expect to be gone for long. Like this, kind of like when they walked up to the hill and took the picture, though then they had their phone with them. I mean, what had to have happened here is they walked up to the hill a couple hundred yards away. They take a picture of Madison. They walk back down to the truck. They put their phone in the truck. They put the dog in the truck, or the dog's been in the truck the whole time. They close the door, and then somehow they end up 2 to 3 miles away, 3.5 miles away, however far they are. And I mean, you can see why the family feels like force had to have been applied here in some way. Well, those are all the facts. That's all we know. So we've already been theorizing about what possibly could have been. And if you can't tell, this is just, to me, one of the most black box kinds of cases. But why not dive into theories? Because there are no shortage of theories in this case. Unfortunately, as you've seen from the last 2 episodes, the evidence just doesn't clearly point to any one direction. The sheriff stated that there is a lot of evidence in the case, but it leads them down so many different avenues that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened or which evidence fits into what ultimately happened. But the sheriff department has stated that they do believe foul play was involved and that the Jamisons did not die from natural causes.
So the first theory is something we've already touched upon a little bit, and that is that the Jamison family died as a result of a murder-suicide within the family. So most times under this theory, Sherry Lynn is thought to be the perpetrator, and that's for a few reasons. First, remember that 11-page hate letter that she wrote to Bobby Dale, and it was found in the truck indicating that she wasn't happy with their relationship, and it even mentioned divorce. Second, there had been discussion of divorce, and the whole reason for the sale of the Jamison home was actually to move to the middle of nowhere, but also to try and save their relationship. The strange thing about this particular fact, though, is if they were moving out there to try to save their relationship, it seems like they were walking in that direction, right? Quite literally, they were walking in the direction of this new lot to save their relationship. So, why would she be taking these steps to save their relationship, but then act out in this way? Number 3, Sherry Lynn had a pistol, but it was never recovered in the truck or the Jamison family home. So some speculate that she may have had it when the family left the vehicle. And this, of course, ties into the fact that there was a small hole in Bobby's skull. Some people have theorized that Sherry Lynn used her pistol to kill Bobby. Remember, though, no gun was recovered around the bodies. And the thing with a murder-suicide is the weapon that kills the last person has to stay there because there's no one else left to carry the weapon away. And so if Sherry Lynn had used that pistol on Bobby Dale, you would think that if she didn't shoot herself and Madison, the gun would have still been on her unless she somehow disposed of it. But then we would still have another murder weapon left behind that would have ended her. And lastly, in July 2009, so this was just a couple months before the Jamisons disappeared or were last seen, Sherry Lynn had actually been hospitalized after an attempted suicide. So she had at least taken violent steps towards ending her own life, leading some to believe that she was the perpetrator in a murder-suicide plot. Now, unfortunately for Madison, this is a family where you can see the perpetrator being either the mom or the dad. Because there are some people who think that maybe Bobby was the perpetrator in this murder-suicide scenario. But there are some glaring issues for a murder-suicide scenario overall. And the biggest one being no murder weapon is with the victims. And investigators, they actually have never been able to determine if the hole in Bobby's head was from a gunshot wound or not. So it might just be from natural causes, might be from something else, but it's not definitive that it's a gunshot wound. And finally, this goes with whoever was the perpetrator in a murder-suicide scenario. If, say, Sherry Lynn wanted to kill herself and her family, why would she leave the loved, absolutely beloved family dog to starve in the car? Why not end the dog's life too, or let the dog run off? Because it's clear that the Jamisons aren't going to come back to him, and they're in the middle of nowhere. The odds of the dog being found before something terrible happened to him were very slim. And truly, we've said this before, it's a miracle that the dog was saved. So why make the dog suffer a slow and painful death in the car when her plan was to kill the family? Also, it seems unlikely that if they were going to do a murder-suicide, that the Jamisons would hike a whole 3 miles from the car in rugged terrain by choice. Family and friends of the Jamisons just don't believe that this is a plausible scenario, knowing who the Jamisons are. We've already said Bobby Dale had a lot of physical challenges from his accident. But despite these obvious relationship struggles, friends and family of Jamisons say that Bobby and Sherry Lynn really did love each other, and they were just looking for a fresh start. This was the start of something new. This wasn't the path to a terrible tragedy. So all reports also state that Madison was their world. So even if the parents had problems with each other, they loved Madison, and friends have said that they would never do anything to hurt their daughter. Now, investigators do not believe that the Jamison family died as a result of murder-suicide. So that's an interesting thing to note. They do think there's foul play, but that the perpetrators are not the family themselves.
I find that really interesting because
that shocked me, by the way. I thought that would be at least on their list of potentials.
Look, they're good arguments, and Alice just made them about why it's not a murder-suicide, but I'm always a little skeptical of what family says, because family always tends to paint the rosiest possible picture of people after they die, or the worst. One of the two. It's either very, very rosy or far worse than it actually was. You don't typically get true to life portraits. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who you could say kids were their world, who end up killing their kids. In fact, you see that a lot. In a lot of these cases, these just terrible cases where one parent kills the other parent and kills the children, you will hear this. Or where one parent, kills the other parent and kills the children. You'll hear how shocking it is because they love the kids so much and they can't believe they would do that. I mean, you hear that a lot. So I'm not necessarily swayed by this as much as apparently the police are, because the police don't think this is possible. Look, the fact that there's no obvious indication of how Madison and Sherry Lynn died, I mean, we have no idea. We have no idea how any of them died. The only evidence we have is this small hole in Bobby Dale's skull. We have no idea how the other two died. There's no holes in their skulls. So we don't even have the possibility of a gunshot wound for them. My understanding is we have all three skulls. So it's not like we had Bobby Dale's and we only had, parts of the others. Like if there was a hole in their skull, we'd know about it. I don't think they would hold that back. Maybe they would. I don't know. They didn't hold back Bobby Dale's, so I don't know why they would everybody else's. And they won't even say that Bobby Dale's is a gunshot wound. If it was a murder-suicide, the missing weapon is a problem. There's a couple possibilities. One, which I realize is a little unlikely, but not impossible, is someone did come across the body and just took the gun. I mean, you may think that's pretty callous if somebody came across three bodies, including the body of a little girl, and never reported it. But I mean, I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibility. There's no evidence of it, but it's a possibility for where the gun went.
We've actually, in the past couple years, or in the past year, I think we've had a couple fugitives on the run, right? Most recently, the Pennsylvania guy who crab walked out of the prison and was on the run in the brush for days, weeks. They got guns eventually, right? So you can imagine if someone is on the run, doesn't want to be discovered, comes across a gun, terrible, horrific sight. They're not going to report it. They're going to take the gun because they care about number one and they're on the run for some reason, right? So this is not that far-fetched of a theory. We saw that happen just this year, just a couple months ago.
Yeah, it absolutely could have happened. Don't have any evidence of it happening, but it could have happened. The other possibility, which I think is also strange, but I guess is possible, is whoever did it, in this case, I think Sherry Lynn, given that the only evidence that a gun was used is the fact that Sherry Lynn's pistol is missing and Bobby Dale has a hole in his skull. Assuming she did it, she shoots both of them. Somehow she shoots Madison in a way that doesn't leave any evidence of it. For reasons that we don't really understand, she, chunks the gun into the woods or gets rid of it somehow and just lays down and dies. Just stays with them and eventually the elements take her. That's a possibility. Once again, there's no proof of it, but if we're operating under the assumption that something very strange is going on here, that's a possibility. To me, though, the fact of the missing gun, I guess an animal could have accidentally taken it off or knocked it somewhere where they didn't find it. The missing gun is a pretty big piece of evidence. It's not definitive because you can imagine ways in which it would disappear. But when you do that, it's going back to sort of Occam's razor. I mean, you're having to introduce some elements into this that we don't have any evidence of. So, and I don't know. I don't know what to think about it.
And we keep talking about gun because we think this hole in the back of the head could be a bullet hole. But what if that hole is kind of a red herring? Maybe it was something else that was not caused by a bullet, in which case there are other ways to kill people without guns and knives, right? Poison being one of them, especially with their bodies being so decomposed. There'd be no autopsy. You couldn't really tell. Certain types of drugs just won't be within their bones to be able to be detected 4 years later. So that's, to me, is a very seemingly obvious way to commit a murder-suicide plot where there are no weapons left. But I haven't really seen the investigators talk about that.
And if you were planning on killing your family, I don't know that the fact the dog was left behind is that big a deal. I realize people always are weird about dogs, but
well, you know what? If your purpose is to get the family away, maybe one of the parents, because someone can drive the car. Madison can't drive the car, but one of the parents can. So to get them far enough away that they can't run to the car and like get out of there, save somebody, then you need to have everyone kind of be together. And a dog, you know what a dog does? They yap. They maybe draw attention. And also if they're trying to get Madison to move along, maybe she would be held up with the dog. The dog probably can't hike 3 miles. Someone finds the dog. Think about, the Scott Peterson case. They see a dog. They think something's wrong. Hey, that's the Jamison's dog. What's it doing here by itself? Maybe a search party comes, right? There's actually lots of reasons to think that if you are to the point where you want to end your family's life, the dog is probably not as high on your list, no matter how much you love that dog. And also, if you let the dog go, what a way to make Madison lose her mind. Absolutely. Like you need her to be subdued if your plan is to end her life. You can't it's really hard to subdue her and to like accurately end her life if she is like bawling and screaming and running after a dog.
The last thing I'll say about the guns, and we can move on to the next theory, is if you recall, this is not the first time we've mentioned guns, because when the family was going through this sort of crisis and believing there were spirits in the house and people were possessed, or maybe not people, but there were spirits, evil spirits, Bobby had actually asked his local pastor about essentially magic bullets that could kill spirits, could banish evil spirits. And it's hard for me not to go back to that when thinking about this case. I would like to know where this bullet, I don't want to call it a bullet hole, where this hole in his skull is, because one thing you could imagine is a situation in which he's decided that these evil spirits have taken over his family. And he's decided that he now has these magic bullets or whatever. Still hard to explain what happened to the gun, but that is just a fact that sort of sits out there that, like so much, and it's like the sheriff said, there's so many little pieces of evidence in this case. And it's hard to tie them all together, but that's something that it's hard to get out of my mind. When you have a situation like this and you have people who go missing and end up deceased in these circumstances. So that's one possibility. It may be a strong possibility. Interested to know what you guys think about it. The second theory that's popular is that it actually was Bobby Dean Jamison who did this. Bobby Dean Jamison he's often called Bob Dean Jamison, which is just hard to even say. So I assume at least at some point he went by Bobby Dean, but Bob, we'll call him Bob. Bob Jamison is responsible for this. He is actually Bobby's father, and they did not have a good relationship at all. If you've listened to some of the other coverage on this, Generation Y did a really good job talking about Bob Dean. Bobby and his father actually jointly owned a gas station at one point, and they had a deep falling out over how they were going to split the profits. And Bobby's mother has confirmed that Bob Dean was constantly making threats against her and Bobby, threats that went as far as threatening to kill them. And the reason the Jamisons had surveillance cameras on their property was because they were worried about Bob Dean, and they wanted to have protection against him. It's also, I think, the reason that they had a gun. The reason Shaylin had a gun was because of Bob Dean. At one point, Bobby tried to get a protective order against his father, but that was ultimately dismissed by the court. So, great suspect. But there's a huge problem with this. At the time the family disappeared, Bob Dean was in a nursing home. He was basically in hospice care. He probably did not even have the physical ability to do this. I mean, remember what he'd have to do. He would have had to have gotten out to where they were, held them at gunpoint, marched them 3 miles into the woods, and then killed them. And in fact, he was in such poor health that he actually died only 2 months after the disappearances. So not to say that, maybe he wasn't just that evil and angry and old man that he was willing to carry out this murder when he was on death's doorstep himself, but it seems like his physical ability to actually pull it off was pretty limited. So he's a good suspect in theory, but when you start looking at the evidence, it's kind of hard to imagine that he could pull this off.
But, Brett, I know someone's thinking it out there. They're like, well, maybe Bobby Dean just hired a hitman We've talked about hit men before, hit women. Not to be sexist here, I guess you could be a hit woman as well. Hit men and hit women are very expensive and they take a lot of money, and there's usually some financial transaction that you are able to trace. Again, Bob Dean was in a nursing home in essentially hospice care. He may have arranged for a killer from his deathbed, but there is absolutely no evidence of that, no record of it. And there was no recent dispute that anyone has spoken of that would have led him in his, dying state to think today is the day I'm going to end my son and his family's life. But I think the bigger issue, even though this seems like such a good suspect, is that this doesn't account for any of the weird things that we have been seeing in the Jamisons' behavior. It doesn't account for the needing blessed bullets to kill spirits. It doesn't account for Sherry Lynn's spirits who are, manifested as children coming in and playing with Madison in their home. It doesn't account for their kind of paranoia causing them to sell their home, live in a storage shed, and build a home in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't account for them pulling their daughter out of school, right? They didn't pull Madison out of school because they were afraid of Bobby Dean. They didn't pull Madison out of school because of Bobby Dean, right? That had nothing to do with Bobby Dean. And that surveillance camera catching them for the very last time before they drove off and were to never be seen alive again doesn't really account for these, 40 trips between Sherry Lynn and Bobby and their trance-like state that psychologists have described as, drug-induced. So this is, again, one of those things where don't be, at least, I start hearing about Bobby Dean and I'm like, wow, this is it. But then it makes me forget all of the other evidence, and taken in totality, could all of those things just been coincidences? Or maybe all the other things were pointing to something else other than Bob Dean?
Yeah. I mean, everything else would just have to be a coincidence, which is a possibility. I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility. And if Bob were in better shape, maybe I could be convinced that is just all a coincidence. But I think all that probably played some role in what was going on. But Bob is not the only possible suspect.
And I know you're all thinking about it, because the next theory is, because of recent developments, I can't say it with a straight face. So other than Bobby Dean, there is a very interesting suspect. See, there's a promising lead that came when investigators discovered that Bobby and Sherry Lynn had a man living with them in the summer of 2009. They had a boarder who was apparently living with them to help out around the house due to Bobby's chronic pain, which again kind of goes to our hiking 3.5 miles. They had to have essentially a boarder be in their home to help out because Bobby was so incapacitated physically. Despite really needing this boarder to live with them to help out, he was extremely threatening to Sherry Lynn and Madison whenever Bobby wasn't around. And this actually came to a head in July of 2009 when the boarder, who was a white supremacist, told Sherry Lynn she should die because she had Native American blood. Sherry Lynn grabbed the gun that they had at their home, and it got so heated that she pointed it at the man and told him to leave the property right away. And when he didn't leave, Sherry Lynn actually fired a shot at the ground by his feet. I mean, this is not your typical dispute. This was open fire type of dispute. I will also note that, so this happened in July of 2009. Remember what else happened in July of 2009? Sherry Lynn was hospitalized for a suicide attempt as well. So I don't know what exactly they were fighting about or what led to them even talking about Sherry Lynn having Native American blood in her lineage. I don't even know if that's true. I don't know if that's made up and someone thought they overheard it. So we don't know anything except two very intense events have happened in July 2009, just a couple months before this move out to the mountains. And the FBI launched an investigation to locate this white supremacist boarder because, again, a fantastic suspect. And they found that, he was living in Wilburton, Oklahoma. And he did have an extensive police record, but he had an alibi. He was able to account for his whereabouts at the time of the disappearance, and he ultimately was cleared as a suspect. So like Bob Dean, even though he may seem like he would have motive, maybe even opportunity to do ill will to the Jamison family, it doesn't appear that he was the one.
Yeah, and just another good suspect that seems to sort of fall away when you look more closely, though. As we always say, when you're cleared as a suspect, it just means your alibi appears to be good and we don't have any evidence, but if more evidence appeared, then maybe they would take another look at this guy. Obviously, we've talked about it several times. The police are obviously interested in this idea, drugs. Are drugs somehow involved in this? And there have been rumors that Bobby and Sherry Lynn were using meth. Now, their family says no. They had no involvement with drugs whatsoever. But the one thing I'll say is remember, Bobby has been in chronic pain for a long time. It's hard to believe that he wouldn't have been on pain medication at some point. And as we all know, this period in the early 2000s was a time where a lot of people who were in pain started using pain medication perfectly legitimately, became addicted to it, and either became users of opioids or methamphetamine or heroin. There are various different ways that people would go. The rumor has been that they were using meth, and this is somewhat substantiated by that video that we talked about that the police looked at, and they thought they're in a trance-like state. They're under the influence of drugs. Meth is an issue in the area. That is the way the police went. And I wonder sometimes if that's what they mean, if they believe in this theory when they talk about foul play. Now, the couple was seen loading a brown briefcase into the truck. That briefcase, much like the pistol, was never recovered. And that has caused some people to speculate that maybe there were drugs in this briefcase. Maybe there was money in this briefcase. And that has also made people wonder about the $32,000. If maybe the $32,000 was not related to this settlement, but in fact was some sort of payment for drugs. So they met someone out there, they gave them drugs in the brown briefcase, and they got the $32,000 back. And then at some point, maybe the person who sold them the drugs decided they wanted the money too. Now, the money was left behind, but remember, it was hidden, and it was hidden pretty well enough that the police didn't discover it until the second search. So possibly there's something going on there. The problem is investigators looked into this, and they looked into it pretty hard because they think they were on drugs. That's obvious. The police clearly believe that. When they watch that video, they think that's what's going on. So they looked into this. They couldn't find anything to substantiate it. No ties to the local drug world. No real evidence that they were using drugs. No illegal drugs found in the truck or in the house. And I just got to tell you, when people are using drugs, if the police ever get to look into your stuff, they're going to find evidence of it. They would have found a meth pipe. They would have found residue. They would have found something.
Text messages.
In the house or in that truck. Something. Yes.
And meth is like, it can be, especially if they're using both of them regularly, like there would be some form of communication. I mean, Brett and I have investigated and prosecuted a lot of drug trades, and the amount of, the drug trade is done in text messages, right? Some phone calls, but mostly text messages in code. And guess what? Those codes are all easily cracked. You would find evidence if you're looking for it.
Yeah. Meth is ice and clear, that kind of thing. And they would talk about it in that way. Shard, that's another one. But you don't see that. So you don't see any direct evidence. You don't see any codes, nothing. So if they were using, and once again, if they were both using meth, they wouldn't have been that careful, because people who use meth don't tend to be that careful. They don't find any evidence of it, and the family is adamant that they are not using drugs.
And also, I know you'll get to the money part, but in order to have a lot of money around, they wouldn't be users of meth. They would be dealers of meth, which would mean even more communication and more evidence of their hand in the drug world. So you would have to believe that they were not just like occasional recreational users of meth, but that they were deep in the trade, able to basically be like kingpins, to be moving tens of thousands of dollars around. Because if they were users, there would not be tens of thousands of dollars around. They would use all of that money on drugs over time.
And there is an easy explanation for the $32,000. They had received $60,000 in settlement for this car accident. And everybody pretty much agrees that the $32,000 came from that, and that they were going to use that to buy the land. This is another place where sort of your Occam's razor comes in. You have an explanation for the money. You don't have to add drugs into it. When you look at their life, you're not seeing evidence of the creation of methamphetamine, which takes a lot of different stuff. Like the police would have found stuff. They would have found, like you can make methamphetamine. I don't want to get into how you do it, but you can make methamphetamine without having a meth lab. They call it shake. Basically you can do it with just a few things, right? But they would have found that stuff.
Look, you've already taught people how to decapitate people with axes and bury people. Let's not teach them how to make meth.
Oh, I gotta teach you how to make meth. But it's not that hard. You can do it. But there's always evidence left behind. And they would have found that evidence, particularly if they're getting robbed and murdered. So it's not like they left their house that day intending to never make meth again, and they covered the whole thing up and got rid of all their materials and all their supplies. No, the police would have walked in that house and they would have known immediately, probably from the smell alone, that they were making methamphetamine, and they're not seeing that. So they might have been on drugs, and maybe they had used all the drugs they had, and that's why they didn't find anything. I still think they would have found evidence of it. But to me, the drug thing, it kind of falls apart a little bit when you look at it more closely, which is the frustrating thing about this case is every single thing you look at seems to fall apart.
That's right. And so why not look to the family for ideas of theories? Because Sherry Lynn's mother definitely has a theory that she holds onto very tightly. She believes that the family was actually killed in some sort of cult ritual. She stated that Sherry Lynn was on a cult's hit list, but never specified a cult name or really provided much basis for this line of thinking. So we know the family did have some strange beliefs that they, at least told their prayer group and their priest, but there's no evidence to suggest that a cult was involved in their disappearance. And I would say those strange beliefs had more to do with potential mental illness rather than any sort of belief in a cult. Because they didn't say Brother John told me that these spirits were coming in to play with Madison. It wasn't tied to anything. Typically with a cult, you have a leader, someone who's telling you what to think, who you are following because they're the prophet from God. There was none of this. I think what they were talking about were delusions caused by either drugs or mental illness. It was not seemingly from a cult leader.
As we know, everybody always wants to believe the sexy theories, and the cult is a sexy theory. There's no evidence of it. No reason to think it's true. I think Alice is right. The references to sort of cult-like activity is a much stronger sign of mental illness than it is of an actual legitimate reason to think this is what happened to them. The last theory is probably the least sexy of all, but might be the most likely. And that's exposure. So remember, they go up there in the truck. We see that they've walked a couple 100 yards away from the truck to take a photograph. Remember what that photograph looked like. We even talked about this a little bit when we're talking about why Madison may look so upset. She's wearing a short sleeve shirt. She's not dressed warmly. It got really cold that night. It got down to about 40. Now, you might think that's not cold enough that you would expect someone to freeze to death. It also rained. So you had a situation where if you were out there that night, you would be out in 40-degree weather, in the mountains, in the rain, with no shelter. They're found about 3 miles away from their truck. When I just say 3 miles, maybe that doesn't seem like it's that far. Actually, it is. That's a pretty good ways away. And we talked about why would they go 3 miles away from their truck? One reason would be they never intended to do that. They went a little distance away, and like happens to so many people in places that they're not familiar with, in wilderness, with no obvious terrain indicators for which direction they're going in, they thought they were walking back to the truck, and in fact, they were going away from it. And they ended up 3 miles away. The sun's going down. Why are they all found together? Because it's possible they were huddled together on the ground, not because someone was shooting them, but because they were huddled together for warmth. But in 40-degree weather, in the rain, lost, with no shelter, and not wearing the appropriate clothing, they actually all died that way, together, lost in the forest. And maybe not even that night. It's possible that this actually happened later on. Remember, we don't know when they died, and we don't know how long they were out there. All we know is they were a good distance away from their truck in the wilderness that they were unfamiliar with in a pretty cold night.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, a lot of that, even though it's not a sexy theory at all, rings very true, right? This makes me think of the story a couple years ago of the woman who had gone hiking in the Appalachian Mountains. She was doing the Appalachian Trail, and I think she'd done it several times, a very experienced hiker, in fact, and she had just gone missing. She was supposed to meet up with her husband, I think at one of the checkpoints, and just never showed up. And years later, I think a group of hikers stumbled upon her, and she was zipped up in her sleeping bag totally decomposed. I think it was just her skeleton left because it had been so long. And at the time, people had thought, surely she would not have gotten lost. She was so experienced. The checkpoint was just like another mile away. There was no way she got lost. Something terrible happened to her. And she had left a note behind. I think she had died a very, very slow death because she could never find her way back. And it was less than a mile to the checkpoint. And the note said essentially like, I got lost. I couldn't find my way. Tell my family I love them. And she was zipped up in the sleeping bag because it was the only, form of warmth she had. And she had died from exposure and from not having enough food over time. But that theory that you just said makes me think of this because we have 4 years passed before we found them. It's possible they survived for weeks. In fact, this theory could still work, and you could definitely walk 3.5 miles away in weeks' time, right? Even with a small child and a man with chronic illness, I think it's unlikely that they survived that long, though, and it's because I think if they had survived that long, we would have seen more signs around them of them trying to survive, right? Like you would think that they'd be able to take shelter somewhere. They would have built a lean-to in some way, even if it's just piling boards on top of each other or wrapping themselves in leaves or something like that. There's usually some indication that you've tried to make a path, I guess. I guess we're just diving into theories now, by the way. And so I do think there's probably an element of the exposure theory I find very compelling, but because there don't seem to be any signs of them having tried to survive for some time around them, I don't think you would have found it on their bodies because so little was left of their bodies, but there wasn't like a hole dug into the ground. For example, you would want to get lower to the ground because the ground holds heat when it's cold. So you would want to dig a hole in the ground and curl up in the hole and cover yourself with brush. We know that there's brush because the picture of Madison had a lot of leaves. For example, you'd put the leaves over yourself so that you get some shelter from the wind and the rain. We've never seen any evidence or heard any evidence of that. And I think if the police had found that, they wouldn't have thought there was foul play. But I have to go by what the police say here, that they think there was some sort of foul play. And so I actually think they probably died close in time to the time they were lost, which doesn't really lend itself to the exposure theory. I don't know that you would die in one night from exposure. It's usually from being worn down over time. But I do think they got lost initially. I don't think they meant to leave for very long. And I think a combination of all of the kind of psychosis that had been happening for both of the parents separately came to a head when they were suddenly lost. I think it may have been something as simple as, let's leave our phone and the dog in the car because Madison needs to go to the bathroom. All need to go to the bathroom. And I'm not talking number one. Maybe they had to go number two, which would have required maybe hiking a little further, a little bit more effort because maybe they had to dig a hole, and maybe Madison didn't want to go number two in the trees. I want to go to the potty or something like that, where it was just a little bit more involved. And all of a sudden, because neither parent is really in their right mind, they're completely turned around and they maybe start fighting with each other. Or all of a sudden, all the psychosis that has kind of been wrapped in this family in the last month comes to a head. Now it's the demon angel children spirits who can't be killed by normal bullets, who have now surrounded the family. And something is happening. And I don't exactly know what happened, but I think there's some mix of the parents were not in their right mind. And maybe they thought they were protecting Madison when the combination of being lost in the wild, because remember what happened the day before? They drove out to this exact place and got lost. But in that situation, they happened to run across someone who lived there who was able to give them directions back to their car. Maybe this time they got lost, no one was around, and then the paranoia started kicking in. The spirits or the whatever beings who didn't want us to leave our home in the city, they're now here after us, and they start becoming paranoid and panicked. And in those states, people are capable of anything. And I don't know if it's murder-suicide, if that's appropriate, but I think something with that psychosis led to something terrible that ultimately ended their lives, and I don't think it was just from exposure. I think something happened with the parents.
I think they died of exposure. I think that's what happened. I think they got lost. I think they wandered around. I don't know how long it took them, but I think they were woefully unprepared. I think they were woefully underdressed. I think they had no resources. They had no water. They had no food. They might have eaten the wrong thing. They might have drank the wrong thing. I think that what they were already, like you were saying, they were in a mental state where they weren't prepared for this at all. I think all of that played into it. I think I think they were probably, even the fact that they went off into the woods in the first place, I just don't think they were thinking clearly. I think there was a lot of unclear thinking going on here. And I think they got lost. And if you read books about, if you've ever read The Cold Vanish, it's a great book. Just check it out. And it's about a lot of different people who get lost and their searches for their bodies, and then they'll be found years later, like in the middle of the search area, because it's so hard to find people in these things. And one thing they talk about in that book is how very early on, you start making decisions that are going to determine whether you live or die. If you get lost in the wilderness, if you don't make the right decisions very early on, because of the fact that you need to drink water and the fact that you're not properly dressed or whatever, you're only going to get weaker. You're only going to get more delirious. You're only going to get more lost, and just your chances of surviving just decline. I think that's what happened. I think they might have been out there for a few days. I think it's getting really cold at night. They're up in the mountains too, so it's colder than it would be in other areas, but it's getting really cold at night. It's probably getting warmer in the day, maybe even hot during the day. They don't have anything to eat. They don't have anything to drink. I think that's what happened. I don't think there was foul play. I don't think this was a planned thing. Could have been that at some point the parents turned on each other. That certainly could happen in a situation like this. But I really think they were just sort of, the reason they didn't really take any steps is because they didn't know what to do, number one. Number two, I just don't think they were thinking clearly. So I just think they were huddling together every night to try and stay warm. And whether it was that first night or in subsequent nights, I think eventually they are wandering around so close to their car and just never reached it, like the lady in the Appalachian Trail. Christopher McCandless, who, if you guys have read Into the Wild, he thought that he was stuck where he was, and in fact, there was a way out like 100 yards away from his bus, and he didn't know about it, so he just ended up dying, right? There was that story not too long ago about the family who went. It was weird. Like, everybody thought it was some sort of strange foul play thing. It was a family and their dog. They went hiking and they found them dead. And it turned out they just were dehydrated. And I think that is not a sexy answer, and we'll never know for sure. But given sort of everything we know, I think it's much more likely that the combination of nobody knowing where they were going, they struggling with issues already in an area that they were not familiar with, where they were not prepared for what they were doing, getting lost, and just unfortunately eventually succumbing. I think that is what I think happened, but I don't think you'll ever be able to prove it. Either way, it's so sad, right? It's so sad because of Madison. The parents clearly were struggling with certain things, and if they just hadn't brought their daughter with them, if they just hadn't pulled Madison out of school, she could still be here. And that's, I think, just such a tragedy here. She was just 5 years old, and whether it was exposure, whether, it was, I don't think the foul play was from someone other than the parents. I think if there was foul play, it was one of the parents. The only thing with your theory, and maybe I just put too much stock into investigators who know more than we do, is that I'm still hung up that they've seen those types of cases of exposure and of being lost, especially in this area of Oklahoma, and they still thought there was foul play. And it may be that they're completely wrong, but I do think that there are things that they may know that we may not. But again, without that evidence, we can't really analyze it and see which of us is right. I really don't think they know anything. I think they looked at that video and they thought they're on drugs, and they went with foul play from that point forward. That's what I think. Now, maybe they did focus on drugs a lot when it seems clear that drugs probably did not have any, at least like drugs that they knew about. Maybe they were being drugged and they didn't know it, but I don't think they were actively seeking out drugs or making drugs or selling drugs. But hey, if you're an investigator in Oklahoma and you know the truth, tell us. Shoot us an email. Let us know. We'll keep it to ourselves. That is fair. If you share something with us and you tell us not to share it, we really don't share it. It's the prosecutor's code. We know the truth about so many of these cases that we just never tell you guys. This is actually true. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Okay, let's see. Oh, so sad. We gotta do some questions. Gotta do questions. Let's see. Here you go, Alice. You can give this person who's clearly a criminal some advice. This is from Grandma Cased. I don't know what that means. Can they go through the bags that you put in the trash can on your property? Yeah. Of course they can. Trash pull, man. Absolutely. Yeah. Don't throw away the evidence of your crime. Don't throw away the evidence of your crime, and
if you throw it in your neighbor's trash, they can look there and tie it back to you. It's not just because it's on their like lot. They're going to be like, it's your neighbor's. They're watching you, first of all. And that's how they know to go do the trash pull, because there's usually something they're trying to tie you to. So they're not just going to be like, do. There's a trash bag. Let me open it. You're under surveillance when they're doing it. And they're surveilling you either from a pole camera or because they're sitting in another building watching you, or a car watching you. And as soon as you put that bag outside to make sure whatever evidence they're looking for isn't tampered with or whatever, or somebody comes by and throws, a banana peel on it, they immediately take it. So yeah. If you don't want something found, don't throw it away.
Yeah, the thing is, you have what they can't search are things you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in. And when you throw something away,
you've given it to the trash man to put into a public dump.
Yes. So like they can't go into your house and like
looking
your trash can out from underneath they can't do that because you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your home. But once you take that trash bag out of your house and throw it in the can, you're done. You're done.
Look, if you take your trash bag and throw it in the back of your truck, they can't do that. They can't go search in the back of your truck. So if you have a trash bag and you put it inside of your car, and your car is in your garage, they can't go into your garage, into your car to get it. The whole point is that you've discarded what it is. So, if you've seen movies, someone's smoking a cigarette, like at a cafe, don't smoke, kids. And the person like discards the cigarette butt behind them as they walk away. And then like you see the policeman bend down and pick up the cigarette butt with a gloved hand and put it in a baggie. It's because it's been discarded, right? Imagine that your trash bag is essentially what you've done is you've discarded that trash into a city dump somewhat 3 miles away from your house, where that trash bag is ultimately going to end up on a garbage truck, ultimately going to dump into that landfill. That's what you've done when you've let go of the trash bag.
Right. And all they're going to do, like if you put it in your truck, like Alice was saying, they're just going to follow you in your truck until you eventually, unless you're just going to keep the trash with you forever, then in which case it's not really trash. It's just your personal belongings that you like to keep in trash bags. At some point, you're going to put that somewhere where they can get it, whether it's in the trash can, like down on the curb, waiting for the trash man to come get it, or throw it in a dumpster somewhere, or you take it to the landfill. At some point, you're going to let go of that stuff, and it's public at that point. You no longer have a expectation of privacy in it.
So like another analogy to help you understand that is, I don't know if this happens in your neighborhoods, but depending where you've lived, and I've lived in lots of different places, and this happens across the country where I've lived, is if you throw away something that is of relatively good use, like you don't feel like selling your bookcase, for example, on Craigslist because you might get murdered on Craigslist. So what you do is you're like, I really don't want this bookshelf. It's worthless to me and it's taking up a ton of space. I'd rather out of my house. What do? You put it on the curb because you're hoping that someone picks it up, because then you don't have to pay for the haul fee from the city to come take away your, big items. And what happens? That bookcase, if it's in relatively good shape, it doesn't even have to be in good shape, to be totally honest. I've put out real trash. Someone's going to come by and claim it. And you don't get to file a claim against that person who has taken the bookcase that you've put on your property on the curb as theft, because you have relinquished that property. Now, if they come onto your property and steal your kid's bike, that's different. But see, that happens. I mean, that truly happens in neighborhoods all over the country that I've lived in, is people will put out, kind of bulk items, and they're really hoping someone will just claim it, and somebody will, because one man's trash is another treasure, and you don't get to say that person has stolen from you.
And just think how weird that would be. Like, how ridiculous would that be if you put a chair out on the curb and somebody took it and you were like, you stole my chair. Everybody would be like, no, they didn't.
You put it on the curb. That's like the universal sign of it's now public.
And so much of search and seizure law is that. It's just like, what does your gut tell you? Did you have an expectation of privacy in that or not? Because, if you were doing something, like imagine if you're out in public and you do something, you can't say, you're violating my privacy by watching me. No, you're doing it in public. Like if you were doing that thing in your house and we somehow were watching you, yes, then you'd have an expectation of privacy. We have to have some sort of warrant, and it's the same type of thing. It's just really what your gut tells you, because it's all about your reasonable expectation of privacy. If you have that, it takes a warrant to search it. If you don't, then you don't. And where this gets tricky and where the courts are really working it out right now is cellular stuff, like stuff online, stuff that under traditional theories of all this, you absolutely have no expectation of privacy in. But the courts have gotten kind of about it because some of it just is so invasive. And we talked about this when we had Jay Burney on. They can just know everything about you from the stuff that you are voluntarily giving to third parties. Investigators can follow every step you make every single day. And the courts are kind of like, they're struggling with that because you're giving it away. Why can't the police look at it? But it's so invasive. So that's where it's all shaking out now. Okay, from Chanatunes wants to know, how long have you both been practicing law? So I graduated from law school. I'm old. Alice is a young whippersnapper. I graduated from law school in 2007. So I guess that was...
Is that right?
16 years ago. So I've been practicing law for 16 years. I was in private practice for a year, working at a big firm in DC, doing like defense stuff. Hated it. Terrible. Clerked for 2 judges for like 3.5 years or so. And then I count that, I guess, as government. Other than that, I've been with the government. I've been in government, in various state government, federal government, all sort of like prosecutee type things or like policy type things since then. So that's me. 16 years. I can't believe that.
That's so amazing. Long. Wow. Like, that is a really long time.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
Ugh.
Look, my career is still in its preteen years, but I have practiced for now almost 12 years, which is like a decade. I mean, a decade.
That's more than a decade.
A dozen years. It's almost like it's a decade. No, it is strange when I talk to like very young people. They're like, "Can you give me advice?" And they're like, "I'm a 2022 grad." I'm like, "You baby."
I know. Yeah, and Alice, other than the last year and a half, Alice was all government.
I know.
She's now on the dark side, but
utterly government until the last year or so. Which, it's so weird because I still use the royal we. I'm like, we, the government. And I'm like, that's not me. That's who I litigate against a lot now.
I know. It's crazy. Okay, so last question, and then we'll go ahead and sign off. Because we haven't talked about this. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but not enough. This is from Cirque, and they say, it's the funniest and dumbest yet intriguing show, but have you watched Jury Duty on Prime?
I binged it.
Yes. Loved it.
I
awesome.
binged it in like one night, I think.
Oh, it was so good.
Oh,
I don't know. I watched it in one night, but it was really good.
You know what's so great about it? All believable. I know they're actors, except for the main guy or whatever. All of that happens in jury trials.
Oh, yeah.
That's the best part.
And just how fickle juries can be is the other thing. Like,
I mean, I know they were actors and whatnot, but like that can all happen in a jury. Absolutely. It was so good. It was so well done.
I also take issue. There were all these people who said that the jury considered improper things. I don't really think they did, number one. I think everything they considered was fine. And juries do that. I mean, juries, like, they can kind of do whatever they want.
And by the way, you know how, like, the defendant's lawyer was, like, supposed to be bumbling and, like, the animation was, like, so bad. And you know what? That attorney is pretty average.
Yeah. No, you definitely see stuff like that.
That is the sad part, right? Like, I know you guys are all, you think all, we have seen some things, not just with our witnesses, but like with other attorneys. And I'm not just saying on one side of the V, like both sides of the V, on the prosecuting side and the defense side. I have seen way more bad lawyers by factors more than I have seen good lawyers.
It's true. If you're out there thinking, could I really cut it as a lawyer? The answer is yes. Oh, you absolutely could.
Absolutely.
I got one going on right now. I'm not going to talk about it because it's going on right now. But when enough time has passed, I have stories
you have to tell. I will remind you of this. I mean, I will. Let me put it
6 months and then remind me.
I had an opposing. I once litigated against someone where the guy was like in the middle of our case. He like wrote me a letter and he was like, "Hey, can you keep CCing me? But I'm like disbarred. I'm suspended for the time being, but keep CCing me so I can keep up to speed on the case." And I was like, "I will not." And then a year later, I got an email from him. He's like, I'm back. I got reinstated. And I was like, whoa. And what he did to get suspended should have been disbarment behavior. And it was like really bad. I mean, it was like stealing his client's funds to buy drugs. Like it was bad, right? It wasn't just like, oh, I just embezzled a little. It's like I embezzled and then did something illegal with the illegal funds. And he was back in a year. And he was like, hey, how you doing? I was like, oh, you're back.
It takes a lot to get disbarred.
It takes a lot to get disbarred.
It takes a lot.
It's a very powerful lobby, them lawyers.
Yeah, them lawyers. Once you get in, it's hard to get them out.
It sure is.
Hard to get them out. All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. We'll be back next week with more stuff. Until then, email us, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Join the gallery. We have so much fun on the gallery. We have a group of us who watch movies now. It's Christmas time, so I'm sure we're watching Christmas movies when you're hearing this. Come watch Christmas movies with us. We have a lot of fun. And obviously, Twitter's hopping as well. Hello to all of you on YouTube who leave mean comments on all our videos. Always appreciate reading them. I get a kick out of them. And if you want to join us for these live recordings, we have a live audience tonight of our patrons. They're amazing. We have so much fun with them, and you can be a part of it too. And you'll get all your episodes early and ad-free. Want to shout out to Jason, who is the host of Santa May Be a Criminal and is our editor. He came and we went to a football game together yesterday, and it was awesome, and we won, so he is welcome back anytime. If we had lost, I would have had to have banned him, but that didn't happen. So good job, Jason. Good job. All right, Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, but I'm really excited to start watching Christmas movies with all of you.
I am too. We got to start planning that, guys. I don't know when y'all want to watch them. I don't know when Alice is available. Alice, when you're, we watch the horror movies on Friday nights. I don't know what you're doing. You're so popular. I'm sure you're like out and about on Friday nights.
Definitely never
on the
out.
Town. Yeah.
You're not going to continue watching horror movies on Fridays, are you? Can we switch it to Christmas?
We've moved on.
Okay, good.
We've moved on to Christmas movies.
Okay.
We're going to watch Hallmark Christmas movies.
Okay, good.
That's my thing. Hallmark. I don't like classic Christmas movies.
Oh, I love classic, and I also like the bad ones, like the really bad ones on the streaming networks.
Exactly, which are basically Hallmark movies. I consider Hallmark movies
it's like a Kleenex.
It's like Kleenex.
Kleenex is a name brand, but it really means all tissues, right?
Exactly.
I hear you.
Hallmark is all those
we're finally
kind of
driving on movies now, Brett.
Yeah. So if you guys want to watch classic Christmas movies, y'all can do that. Y'all can set that up in the gallery. We will be watching Hallmark movies. And remember, I have bingo cards. So I will share with you the bingo cards. We're going to watch them. And that's going to be awesome. And in fact, I think we should start this Friday for the patrons.
All right.
If you're listening to this now, we already have done this.
That's
but
true.
This Friday night, I was going to be out of town, but I'm not going to be out of town anymore.
Oh, good. I will be back in town on Friday.
There you go. We need to talk about your schedule for this week, by the way. We can do that afterwards.
You and me both.
We're going to watch Hallmark Christmas movies. I'll figure one out to watch. We could watch Snowman's this week.
Let's do a poll. Let's let the people speak on the gallery.
We'll let the people speak. The gallery will decide. The gallery will decide.
The gallery,
we're gonna
both
pick.
Patrons and non-patrons can vote.
Exactly. Everybody can vote because everybody can watch. You don't have to be a patron to watch Christmas movies. We will give you guys a selection of movies to watch this Friday and as many Fridays as we can. And it's going to be amazing. All right. Well, you guys are awesome. We'll be back next week with a new case, new questions, maybe new answers. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
There we go. Seems, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I was a little bit late getting here because what we record on, the software, was like, error! Do you want to abort mission? And I was like, what mission are we on? So sorry about being late, but I was like, this is very serious. Mission control.
Very serious.
Do you copy?
Mission control. Houston, we have a problem.
Oh my goodness.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice. I was typing.
Did you
I'm
forget?
sorry.
Did you forget your line?
No, I was typing. I was typing a Christmas movie.
Wow. And we are the prosecutors.